Hey everyone, welcome to the Magical Stories of Healing and Spiritual Gifts podcast. My name is David, here with my amazing wife, Miss Megan.
Hi everyone.
And we have such a special guest today. We connected a while back. Mr. Wyly Gray, founding director of Veterans of War, talk about a story of not only overcoming personal demons and but using that battle of triumph to just make such a beautiful, positive impact on the world with this movement in the world, in the veteran world. He's survived broken family, foster care, 2 deployments, PTSD. I mean, the list goes on. We love how much he's in alignment with bringing awareness and healing through these plant medicines, which is such a interesting, many things we're going to talk about on this podcast, such an interesting world with veterans and how kind of destroying the stigma of plant medicine and what it can do for healing. So Wyly, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel like we're at an interesting crossroads right now where the desperation in the community is meeting the need for access. And hopefully we have some good ambassadors that are able to stand up and help people find the much needed healing that people are so desperately looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's so true. And I noticed, we connected and about a month or so ago, and you commented on our Magical page, and you said there was a lot of similarities between your story and I think Megan, my wife, who just had so much trauma in her life, and with this podcast, we were just so interested in just talking to you and hearing your story and what you have to say. Our community, we are so excited to get your story and your message to our community, who we think could use your knowledge and what you're doing so much. So if you don't mind, I'd love you to speak a little on what similarities you saw there.
Yeah, let me take a couple steps back. Firstly, I appreciate it. Absolutely. I think that there are a few things that I think we always have to talk about when we're in the psychedelic community. The first is how important it is to understand that there's a lot of work that you need to do when you do a psychedelic, when you're having access to plant medicines. It's not just a miraculous healing. It's a process where you're working in tandem with another very sentient organism. So rather than it being like the clinical model where this is the thing that is bothering you, here's the pill that puts it away, call me in the morning, it's interactive. And I think that's an important part of the process. I think a lot of people get hung up on the miracle cure, but forget the work that is necessitated on the front and back end. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing I would say is I feel very lucky. Like, you read that list of things that I've survived. There are people that I'm connected to that have had life so much worse in every aspect of everything that you just mentioned. I'm here today with my fingers and toes. My deployments weren't nearly as rough as some people's. I'm here today to talk, for example. That already puts me in a different category than some people that unfortunately aren't able to. The need for what I do is absolutely paramount. It couldn't be more prescient. We lose 20 veterans a day to a preventable outcome, to a statistic that I was almost a part of. That's really the reason why I talk about it. I don't think that I'm, some gifted person or some sort of a superhero to overcome trauma. I think that I had my share of trauma, and I was very fortunate to have people around me and the wherewithal to be able to search for good information, to find ways to safely and effectively come back from trauma. And that's really what I offer to veterans. The way that most people visit me is out of a sense of, as I said earlier, desperation. They've tried everything else. I mean, I remember going to talk therapy and group therapy. I've been involved with equine therapy, adventure therapy. You name it, I've tried to get better with it. But the sad reality is the efficacy simply wasn't there. Whenever I was away from each of these modalities, my trauma would remanifest. I would be anxious again. I would be scared. I would, have insomnia. And only through my journeys with plant medicine have I found any real measure of reconnection and the ability to truly, not just, be okay, not just to, keep living and keep paying my mortgage, but to thrive, to come back and to actively want to connect and want to change things. So the impetus for Veterans of War was this idea of, if this is so powerful for me, how many of your veteran peers could benefit from it? And if they were to need to benefit from it, what needs to be in place so that they can have the best possible chance at long-term positive outcomes. And that's really the framework for the Veterans of War 6-month fellowship. You asked about, how these stories were connected. I think that everybody that has one of these journeys is connected. I think that once you go beyond the veil, so to speak, and you start to see the unbound connectivity between all of us, it becomes very, very hard to focus, for example, on just your specific version of your own trauma. There's plenty of trauma to go around. That's just a part of being human. It's not a part of being a veteran. It's not a part of being a man or a woman or a Christian or a Muslim. It's a part of being a human. So it's never been more, I think, important to find safe and effective ways to overcome trauma than it is today, when literally the whole world is reeling from something that we can't control.
Yeah, absolutely. Plant medicine, it has been so profound in my experience, because like you, I had tried everything. I've been to psychiatrists, been to psychologists, I've been to Christian counselors. You name it, I did it. I did all conventional ways. That didn't work, obviously, and of course they all, like you said, they want to push antidepressants, Xanax. I was on Xanax for 20 years because of a doctor. And all it did was, like, I realized once, thank God to him, I was able to get off of it. Everything, that's where ayahuasca came to play, because everything hit me in the face. And it was just like, oh my gosh, is this how I would have felt the last 20 years? And it was crazy. And
that's not to say that, like, Western medicine doesn't have its place. I think it's incredibly important that we integrate these modalities with the existing mental health care models where we can.
yeah.
I'm not sure how ayahuasca fits that narrative, if it does at all.
Yeah.
I think taking ayahuasca out of its setting will necessarily change its set.
I agree.
And that's honestly one of the reasons why we work with ayahuasca predominantly at this point with Veterans of War. It's not because it's the only thing that's effective. There are a few reasons. It actually is one of the only ones that has the ability to help you recover memories that you might have purposefully forgot.
Yeah.
Right.
And when we talk about trauma, this is one of those real connections. Our trauma goes back to our childhood. It's not just, for me, the Marines. It's foster care. It's abandonment. It's am I good enough?
Right.
It goes all the way back, and these feelings of security are tied into all of them. It's no question why I joined the Marines. I needed to find a way to protect myself and protect those I cared about.
Well, and you probably suppressed trauma as a child for protecting yourself as well.
And that's the connection. That's what I was saying. I'm sure both of us can share that very, very easily. And it's very hard to, ayahuasca has a very low trafficability, worry to it. It's not pleasant.
I hated it.
You're going to be vomiting and shitting your pants potentially. And, if vomiting spiders and shitting rainbows sounds pleasant to you, then this is a great time. Enjoy 4 hours of your heaven on earth. But most people tend to have to go through quite a bit of darkness before they even get to the purge side of it. And then when you actually do purge, it's welcomed. I love to vomit when I'm there. Talking about it sounds crazy, right? But you're waiting for it. You're like, oh my God, because it's usually tied to some sort of, some trial that you're going through in your heart or in your soul. They're connected to memories. You don't just purge randomly. I think that's one of the things other people think. Your purging is very timed to your journey. You really purge the thing that you were experiencing in that moment. I think that's a really interesting process. The other thing I think that's super interesting about it, a little bit off topic though, is how it seems like certain people seem to have very similar experiences. Like you visit some of the same entities, or you're in the same situation. And that to me, it goes back to Terence McKenna calling this a technology.
I love Terence McKenna.
And it is, this is kind of a technology to access these other dimensions or realms. I'm not going to put judgment or define the words of where you go, because I think that's different for everybody. I think that that's part of the journey, is coming to terms with what that is. But one thing I've said quite a few times is I've gone into ceremony with atheists, but I've never come out with one.
That's so true. That's
very difficult.
Yeah.
We got a book called it's weird how it divinely came to us, called The Psychedelic Gospel, and we
I
just
have
started
that.
reading. So we just started. We're like just starting it, and it's talking about how like there are actually things about plant medicine and psychedelic throughout the. Now a lot of it was taken out. That's a whole other
Right.
conversation.
But the iconography, like the ecstatic state that a lot of these saints have talked about, there's compelling evidence in that book that could have been from psychedelics, and it goes back to the stoned ape theory too. Like, how did we get so smart? Well, maybe it's because of psilocybin. Maybe it's because we got out of the trees and started looking around. Maybe that's the origin of the Adam and Eve story altogether. It's a way to mythologize the idea that we ate something and it changed the way we saw the world.
Wow.
I got chills, man. I got just a little bit separate question that just came to me. It's a little personal on my part, but love my dad to death. He's an incredible human. Unfortunately, we haven't spoken about 5 years because of whole psychedelics things. He's heavily conditioned, not down talking him at all. He's in the Marine Corps for many years.
I understand.
Yeah, he's in the Marine Corps for many years, did multiple deployments, very, very conditioned, and I was part of the psychedelic movement. Mushrooms specifically, he thinks it's bad as heroin. I guess my question to you, where I'm going with that is, man, in my heart, especially you're talking with Joel and many of these people, and especially you with this movement of helping veterans specifically, have you run into, which I'm sure you haven't, how do you overcome such, out of all the people that I feel are conditioned and indoctrinated, how do you deal with such heavy stigma with someone that it could help so much, but they're so convinced it's this evil,
you can't
bad
force
thing? Like, how do you go about that? And in your world, I feel like you have to deal with that.
Always. This is a huge part of my job. I mean, my outreach calls are the first 30 minutes of any of my outreach calls invariably is education. They don't know what I'm talking about. They don't know the scientific background for it. They don't even know the cultural background for it, which is ayahuasca specifically has been literally used with humanity parallel to our cultures and as part of our cultures for millennia. The simple answer is you don't. You just don't. You have to understand that everything happens on time. Like when you bring that, if you can bring information without the necessary impetus of changing a mind, if you just bring the information because you know it has value and you lay it on the table, that's a much stronger statement than forcing somebody to take that and eat it, right? Yeah. So for me, I realize outright that there's some people I'm just not going to be able to change. They're not in that place where they are even receptive to the message, let alone would they want to hear that message necessarily, even if they were. Right. So take that out of the equation. Here's the efficacy. Here are the scientific studies that prove what I'm saying. This isn't an opinion. If you're still interested, I can give you some anecdotal evidence. This is where I come from. This is my story. And I've just got to hope on the back end that those other slivers of consciousness that I know now are me also, that they, when their time is right, find access where they need it, which if I've done my job could even be me. So ultimately, I think that you have to take your own ego out of the equation. You have to lay it on the table and say, this is what works. Check it out if you want to. And boy, that's easy to say and hard to do.
Yeah.
Wow, that was beautifully worded, man. The slivers of consciousness.
It's true. The person has to be open.
Yeah.
They have to be open.
You're planting seeds.
Right.
A lot of people will say that in the psychedelic community, that like the message will resonate if it's your time. Well, I've talked to thousands of veterans in my life, but I've only gotten tens or hundreds of veterans interested in doing this extreme out of the box solution. And why is that? Well, they'll come when it's time to come. That's it. You're gonna you blow the trumpet in the wind, and your followers will come when it's their time. You just keep blowing. You gotta know in your heart and in your head you're doing it for the right reasons, and the people that need to hear your message will hear your message.
And that's so true, because I think even a year prior to my ayahuasca experience, if you would have approached me about, I definitely would have been like, hell to the no, like
Yeah.
not doing it.
Yeah.
Would not have done it because I was still even working on like my mindset and reprogramming my mind just from other things and learning how manifestation, everything, how universal laws work. And it wasn't until I started learning those things that I think that I was even able to just mentally even be in a place where I could be open to have that healing with ayahuasca. So I do think it's all about divine timing. I do. Yeah.
No one's late. Time is a construct. You're never late for anything. You're always right on time.
Man, that is just, oh man, I'm just such a fan of psychology and the mind. And what I love about just the way you explain things, there's this deep subconscious psychological foundation of faith that you have that is, I think, one of the most underrated things you can have in this life and what we create, like this foundation of faith, of knowing that it's all happening on time, like, you know, you're in the right place at the right time, it's all supposed to happen. And I think that's something too that I never really had until I really started in a very more a sacred, respectful way experimenting with these medicines.
You know, I think that's a really important part. I think that, you know, I get the response, you know, this changed my life. Well, yeah, you were doing drugs in the woods. Of course it did. That's a very easy response. And I would be, you know, if I don't at least admit that there's some validity to that viewpoint, then I'm not doing myself credit because I'm not able to fight it, right? All right, I understand that that might be how you feel about it, comma, what if it's more than that, right? And again, being able to say and take your ego off the table is, that's an easy statement, but I have people in my life right now that I would desperately love to have this experience.
Man, I know.
But the reality is me pushing them into that experience before they're ready to it might be disastrous.
Right.
You have to be in a way like the gardener. You know, the gardener doesn't yell at the soil. He plants the seed and walks away and waters it and understands that it will grow. Like,
Oh, what's that timestamp? That was freaking perfect. That statement was amazing.
Uh-huh.
I want to use that clip. That was just so good. That was so beautiful, man. I've never heard that. But man,
just made it up.
that was absolute freaking gold. Put that in your book, your next book, man. That was great.
Yeah, I'm writing a book next year.
Oh,
The reason I'm not doing that now is I've got a full load at Georgetown University. My mother-in-law is dealing with cancer, and you know, life is hard for everybody right now. Don't let this suit and some clean words distract you from the fact that I'm also a human being and I'm struggling like everyone else.
yeah.
It's tough out there right now.
Yeah.
It's never been more important to love yourself and have empathy for others. That's really the most important thing. If I could get anything out of this podcast today, walk away and love yourself a bit. Remember that you're okay. And you know, what it is now is not how it will ever always be. It will always change. The only constant is going to be change.
Right.
So remember that, and it's a lot easier to roll with the waves, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Well, Wyly, could you tell our audience, I mean, if you don't mind, just going into your story, how are you led to plant medicine from your time in the Marine Corps to plant medicine?
Trauma. There's trauma. I've had a fairly dynamic life. When I got out of the Marines, I thought I was okay. Like I bet most veterans feel like when you get out, it's really hard to see yourself in the mirror as anything other than this image you built up. But I had a very real moment where I came back from school one day and my ex-wife was in the kitchen and my little brother was there and he'd eaten all the bananas. It was like something fairly tiny and inconsequential. And I went off like he had, you know, insulted my mother or something. I was so angry. And I remember I picked up the wooden bowl that held all of our fruits and I threw it at the wall. And then we had a mirrored wall there and it shattered. And I literally had that Michael Jackson Man in the Mirror moment where I saw myself in the reflection and all the shattered glass. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't say a word. I turned around and went straight to the VA. And that was 2009. That was about a year after I got out of the Marines. And I basically said at the VA, I was like, I just feel like I can't control myself. I might be a danger to myself. I might be a danger to others. I get this rage that I just can't contain. And I was like, and it doesn't feel normal. I'm not sleeping. I'm not, you know, everything is setting me off. My anxiety is through the roof. I'm constantly checking where are the doors, where are the windows, who's standing, who could be a threat, does that person have a knife? Like I'm constantly assessing the situation. And that constant state of hyperarousal is absolutely exhausting. And you couple that without sleep, and suddenly it's like, you're a nerve exposed in the wind, right? Everything is rubbing you the wrong way.
I am resonating with all of that to a T. Wow. Except for, obviously not looking at, windows and such, but man, I feel for you. I feel you on such a deep level now.
It's hard. I mean, that's all I'm trying to say in the end is like, I was dealing with a lot of mental things that weren't projected on paper. On paper, I looked fantastic. I mean, on paper, boy, you could hire that guy any day of the week. But in reality, I was struggling to do basic tasks. And at first it started with, I think, a YouTube video, Dr. Rick Strassman's The Spirit Molecule. That's what I found. And Joe Rogan was the MC for that documentary. And I was looking at some of his stand-up or something, and it led me to it. And so I watched that, and just like, other times in your life where the hair starts standing up on your arms, like I knew there's a connection here and I needed to know more. So I started researching, and I researched psychedelics, DMT, connectivity in your brain, some of the physical manifestations of how PTSD actually works in your brain, like how your brain has changed from the chemistry it was before and now post-trauma. And the VA at that point had basically told me, this is your new reality. You're just going to have to get used to it. We can medicate you to make you feel normal. But the second you stop taking that medication, you're going to revert back, which told me outright, just as an intrinsically as a healer, like that you haven't affected the trauma at all.
Right.
Like, all you keep doing is bandaging over a bleeding wound, and it's still bleeding. Like that's the second you take, as well as I do, when you put, Neosporin and a Band-Aid on, your expectation is in a couple of days that wound will be closed, right? That's not the model for healthcare right now. And there's no incentive for it to be. There's a lot of money tied into you continuing to have these symptoms. And I didn't take that answer. I was not satisfied with this is your new reality. So I kept studying. It took an incredible amount of trauma for me to get over my fear of going on the actual journey. That's the other part that I think is a travesty about the entire situation. How many of my friends have I had to bury since I got out in 2008 that could have been saved, that could have at least had an option of having a different life, but were barred from it because of this stigma. Were barred from it. Didn't even have access to the information at all. So it took a miscarriage for the entire world to fall out, and what last vestiges of solid land in my mind, once those crumbled, I felt like if I don't change something, I'm done. I just can't do this anymore. I can take all this trauma, but now you're hurting my family, and I can't be okay with that. I don't know how to be okay with that. And that's what my soul was screaming again and again. And finally, I was like, I said to my wife, I was like, I'm going to buy a ticket and go to Peru. And she's like, are you going with somebody? You don't even speak Spanish. And I was like, I'm just going to go. I'm just going to figure it out.
Wow.
And then I basically took like a dark ops, journey to Iquitos. I didn't know what I didn't know. I only knew what my hopes were. And I ended up at a place that was, later I realized was absolutely a horrible decision. A very dark energy worker, incredibly powerful experience without a doubt, but dangerous to my soul. And I could feel that. I knew it. One of those people that I feel like I'm a very old soul. Like I've been there. And I realize in some ways that I'm coming back and I'll be here again. And for whatever reason, whenever I'm in the medicine, I'm really comfortable. And that's weird. Like most people aren't really.
Wow. No.
I know exactly how to move. I know how I can react in those spaces. I know how to protect myself, it seems like, just instinctually.
Wow.
So I did. I had to a few times. And then I learned later, after, again, like what the hell happened, like reading about it, trying to take it apart. One of the things that I learned from the Shuar people was that There are basically two kinds of people in the medicine. You have somebody that's intrinsically going to be a healer and somebody that's intrinsically going to be a sorcerer. This is way more mystical than I intended on going with this.
Yeah. I've heard this. I've heard this. So
they start at the same place. That's the thing that you have to understand. It's not like black and white. Like, it's very much a gray area. And your ability to choose one or the other comes with your ability to have restraint or self-control. When you're in this area, you can either react in an aggressive way or react in a defensive way. So my natural response when I felt threatened was to like protect myself and the people around me with a bubble of pure love and light. Like, I willed it into existence, and I was positive it was there, and it would stay there as long as I needed it. And I could see it, like a literal, like a force field. And at that, and it was exhausting. Like, holding it was exhausting. Keeping it was exhausting. Like, every moment I had to like concentrate on that it was there and knowing that it was there despite the assaults. And then that next morning, as you know, the sun came up and I heard the roosters. My only thought was, I got to get the hell out of here. That shit was dangerous. Like, I've gone to a lot of places that I felt danger for my physical person, but that's the first time I felt in danger for my soul. And so I left and I was terrified. I didn't come back to Peru for 2 years. But I always knew ayahuasca is still ayahuasca despite the situation. And even when I encountered her later, you know, it was like seeing a familiar writing, right? Like, maybe it was cursive now, whereas before it was block script, but I understood this was the same author. And it was really about the facilitator, about the shaman himself. It was about being in balance and knowing what you're offering, as opposed to feeling like you're entitled to something or that there's some sort of respect or honor that you're not being paid. The first shaman was very money-based. The second shaman, in fact, to even test him, I told him I couldn't pay him. And he was like, oh, that's fine. You can just pay me whenever you need to. Whenever you come across some money, you can send it to me if it's convenient. So of course I paid him all at once and everything. I had the money. It was about that. It was awesome. About, where's your heart? Like, what's your motivation? And that's the shaman that we use with Veterans of War today. But I would have not had, like, I wouldn't have known what to look for if I hadn't had those bad experiences. I wouldn't have known that it's part of my responsibility to protect the people I go there. And the way I do that is through ensuring that the people I work with have the right intentions. That's a huge, important aspect. But I didn't know that until I was put in a position where that was not the case. So, yeah, I look at it now and I'm like, well,
I'm surprised you did it again.
I needed that experience. Well, my soul didn't join the Coast Guard, right? I joined the Marine. I didn't start out with a family. I started out in foster care. Like, there's a part of me that sort of just gets that my heart and my soul wants life on hard mode. I'm exhausted by it. But I realize that seems to be a part of my journey. And one of the things that I learned in ayahuasca is it is incredibly critical for my growth to understand the other side. Like, to be able to be that bridge between the trauma and the potential healing. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult position to be in sometimes, but I'm glad that I'm there. Because I look around and some people maybe would make different choices. Not that mine are all great. I make a lot of mistakes too. But I think at the end of the day, I'm doing it for the right reasons. Like, I'm looking out for others and I'm trying to make sure that their experience is not what I had to endure, and instead is what we as a people can actually expect as access to our birthright.
No, that's amazing. Have you experienced like anything other than ayahuasca and the psychedelic world that's been really profound and healing for you?
I started out with LSD because obviously you can get access to that fairly easily in the United States. And that's what led me to ayahuasca, honestly. Like, the moment I was sitting in my room, again, no sitters, no training, I just got some drugs and I'm going to do some drugs. And I was sitting, writing a journal. I was fascinated by some of the journals that I had, seen from the 60s and 70s where the CIA were, experimenting on people. And the disassociation, the way that like people's could take apart lines and things would melt. I thought that was really fascinating. I was waiting for that. what I found instead was I was trying to write my child's name again and again. I get like emotional even talking about this. And instead of being able to, I just kept drawing a straight line, like the heartbeat monitor when we found out that we lost our kid. And I was furious. Like I was crying very real from my soul tears. Like, why? Just draw his name. Just draw his name. He's real. He's a real person. And I couldn't. And as I sat there crying over, you know, my journal, I was like, I have to go deeper. And that was the night that I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to Peru. I'm gonna go and try this ayahuasca thing. And she is very Catholic. She was terrified. And she was right. I got myself into a very dangerous situation. I'm glad that for whatever reason I was able to, you know, walk out of it. But yeah, I think this is why we need to have more information. It's why we need to have education. It's why we need to have respectable institutions that can give you access to other respectable institutions so that people can actually use this for the good. Anytime something is powerful, you're going to have charlatans. That's anything in the world. You're going to have people that are there for their own benefit as opposed to the benefit of the whole. Dodging those people can be difficult.
And so after your second ceremony, you got that healing. What happened after that? Third. Okay.
The first ceremony was kind of showing me where, you know, my darkness was. Another thing to bring up is the Brujo shaman that I went to that first time. He used 3 different types of ayahuasca. I don't know how knowledgeable you are with ayahuasca, but just like marijuana, there's strains, right? There's strains of ayahuasca, and they all have names, and they have particular, just like indica and sativa have different properties on your body. Ayahuasca has different strains that have different journeys. And one of the harder ones, at least one of the ones that's supposed to take you more into the darker realms, is called black ayahuasca.
Is that what I had?
Usually if you went to in Iquitos, you usually get cielo, which is called sky ayahuasca. That's the typical Shipibo route, and they saw that as like a ladder. That's why it's, you know, the vine of souls. It was a ladder into the cosmos to talk to your, you know, whether they were your ancestors or your helper spirits. But sky is what that was called indigenously, so cielo, and that's what most people get. So we started out, the first one was cielo, and then the second one was black. And the experience there was again, just terrifying. I mean, that's where I died. That's where, you know, your ego death it's always very personal. Like it's whatever you're afraid of, however you define your loss of person. I feel like that's how it manifests. So for me, I was anthropomorphized. I was like a fox, and I was in this verdant green field, and I never felt more free. I remember I could like feel my ears moving on my head and responding to sound. And I was like I was finally like in my real form. Like, again, I felt like this was like somehow I'd stuffed my soul into Wyly Gray, and it never quite. And so in this space, I was just whatever I am, right? However that was, and I was so free. And I remember I was mischievous, and I was jumping around, and I wasn't destroying anything. I was playing with things, and I reveled in my own like cunning and my ability to move. And then immediately across my eyes, spider webs, and I started getting like sucked down, and I could feel that there was this giant spider just out of my periphery that I couldn't see, and that I was slowly going to be eaten. And I tried everything. Like I was using every bit of guile to try to get out of the trap, but just how you know in that space, there's no getting out. Like I knew it in my heart, like this is it. You're going to die in a few minutes. You're going to die. And every breath I took, I would get closer to the ground as it tightened, like a boa constrictor. And it became like physically, my chest was tight. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even breathe. And I knew, like, you're getting close. This is going to happen in just a minute. Are you okay with this? This is happening. There's no way out. You're going to die now. And for whatever reason, like in that very moment, I started counting off all the shitty places I'd been in my life. I was like, well, you didn't die in Yemen. You didn't die in Bosnia. You didn't die in Afghanistan. I guess, the floor of a hut in Peru, that's what got you. And I started laughing. And I just accepted it. I was like, this is it. And the second I did, it all went away. And I went straight.
Wow, because you let it go. Yeah, wow.
I've seen people fight, though. You're going to get the lesson. You're going to get the lesson. And if you don't listen to the way it's presented to you the first time, if you're not able to surrender and integrate, it's going to get harder. So I feel very lucky. Again, like for whatever reason, my response to it was just to laugh and say, "This, so be it. If this is it, this is it." And that's I right now in the fellowship, one of my main goals is to teach the veterans how to surrender. And that's an interesting word to a veteran. You never surrender. It's a loaded word.
Yep.
And I have to let them understand that surrendering doesn't mean giving up. Surrendering means being okay with going in the direction it's already going. And that's a small change, but again, it's all about framework, right? It's about how you cue up that video to somebody. So it either promotes fear or it promotes, uncertainty maybe at best.
Right.
And I'm okay with uncertainty, but I want to steer out of fear if possible.
Yeah.
Wow. Especially in that concept of control, we're like so conditioned to always have control of everything in our lives. So this, going into especially any kind of psychedelic, but especially ayahuasca, the surrender aspect is so important. So going from someone that has been told you need to have control all the time to fully surrendering is such a difficult journey. Like
telling somebody about guns and shooting somebody are completely different.
Yeah.
You're just going to have a different, you're one of them is knowledge and the other one's experiential. One of them has a scent and a sound and a timestamp. I say to the veterans, I'm like, you're not, I can't possibly tell you what you're going to encounter, but I can tell you that you're going to have some darkness. And I would encourage you to try to learn from the lessons being shown and to try to walk into the current and go with it. Because if you fight the current, you're going to end up like a salmon trying to spawn upstream. You're not going to make any progress, and it's going to be painful.
Oh yeah, I felt like I had no option but to surrender. But I don't know. I think that might have been more of the 5-MeO-DMT. It seemed like that was what really did that for me. So we've had a lot of conversations with people in this veteran world around ketamine. Are you familiar with what ketamine does? And if you
disassociative.
Yeah. Have you found that to be healing and helpful for veterans?
Okay, so this is really interesting. This is something I was just talking about a couple of days ago, actually, with somebody that runs a ketamine clinic in Utah. Firstly, we work with ayahuasca, right? But I don't say we work with ayahuasca on the website. I don't say that anywhere other than when people start getting into the programming. I think that all psychedelics, this is like a pharmacy. It's an ancient pharmacy, right? And there are applicable psychedelics for some of the applicable maladies or traumas that you deal with. It's not a one size fits all. Just like you wouldn't take Tylenol if you have hemorrhaging inside. Like it doesn't make sense. It's not the right thing. So I think that, finding where to use these specific medicines is incredibly important. And for me, the way that I understand it, and I'm going to preface this, I have not had any experience personally with ketamine. It's all anecdotal. But the way that I understand it is, it's used on battlefields today as basically a pain reliever. And the reason it works is because it's a disassociative, because it's able to separate your body from the trauma it's experiencing. And if it's given when that trauma happens, it has a prophylactic effect towards the common symptomology that would result in your brain that would indicate PTSD, which is amazing. But how do you always give someone a psychedelic when they're having their trauma? It's unrealistic.
Yeah.
So what it really, I think, is good for is it's a stabilizer. I think if somebody, like for example, with my program, it's 3 phases. The first phase is 2 months, and it's based on education and preparation. All I'm trying to do is get you ready for what you're about to feel, right? And understand your tools when you're in that area. But that takes 2 months. That's 2 months of biweekly calls and guided group therapy. What if someone's having a crisis that very moment? What if they don't have 2 months to prepare, right? Well, this is where ketamine makes a lot of sense. You can give somebody a shot, and for the next 2 months, month and a half, 2 months or so, they're not going to have any of those feelings of anxiety or depression. It's literally like, if used correctly, in some respects, it's like a miracle. Like the second you put it in someone's body, they feel better about themselves, about the world. So if used, for example, as a preparatory measure in even my program, I think it would have an incredible amount of efficacy. Iboga, like this isn't necessarily something that is for everyone. It's incredibly taxing on the body. But if the thing that you're having problems with is already incredibly taxing on the body, and it's just a draw in terms of whether or not this is going to be dangerous, it's showing that it's incredibly effective at ceasing chemical addiction.
Yeah.
So like if you, for example, are hooked on meth or hooked on whatever, heroin, cocaine, you can go and potentially have Ibogaine one time and immediately quit. No withdrawals. Your body is just done with it. Well, that's amazing. That's a crazy thing to sell to somebody that's suffering from a lifetime of addiction.
Yeah.
But it's easy to say these stories, and what we're not talking about is the hard work of integrating this new reality. So often we talk about how the potential is important, but just like the potential of this being a good or a bad trip, to use the common lingo, the potential also needs to be looked at in terms of how can we potentially prop up these long-term positive outcomes. And the only way to do that is to have a support structure that understands the journey and at the same time is invested in supporting you on that journey.
That's huge.
You got to have peers. That's the last part of the fellowship. So phase 1, again, 2 months of education and preparation. Phase 2, you're going to the medicine. It's the workshop. I never call it a retreat. You're not retreating from anything. You're going to do some work, and that's important. So you go to the workshop. It's 10 days. They'll have 4 opportunities to take ayahuasca, should they choose to, in a safe and secure setting. And then after that workshop phase 3 starts, which is the bulk of the fellowship. 4 months out of the 6 months are spent on inspiration and support.
Wow, that's incredible.
Again, like 66% of the fellowship is the back end. It's after the medicine. And anybody that's worth their salt in this game will tell you that, the medicine's important, right? The medicine's incredibly important, but the work stops when the medicine stops, right? Like, the work starts when the medicine stops, sorry. So, you gotta, just getting the medicine's half the equation. You gotta have life around that built so that it can support this new reality.
Wow.
I mean, I agree with that because, where we went, they didn't offer integration, but luckily we had access. Yeah. But luckily we were aware of what we needed to do for integration, but I mean, so that's huge that you do that for people, because a lot of people, they'll think that they had profound healing, and then a month later they go back home, they go back into the way things were already before, and then they think that they've taken all these steps backwards. They're like, oh my god, here I am, anxiety again, this and that again, because they did not do the integration. They didn't do the work after.
I like to say that you're suffering from premature enlightenment. You have to, what you saw was a version of what could be, and now it's up to you to do the work to keep that version alive.
Wow, that's
a good way to put that.
Well, man, bring us up to speed on what you're doing now. I mean.
So Veterans of War has something I'm really proud of that we're doing is that we're directly trying to perform outreach to the indigenous people in the Amazon basin. They're being disproportionately affected by both COVID-19 and an outbreak of dengue fever. Their entire medical complex outside of Iquitos has collapsed. And they would traditionally subsist off of the money they make from foreigners and their ability to go to the local market. Well, now there's no foreigners and the market is closed. So people are dying in the street. People are eating trash. And these were the wardens that kept this tradition alive so that people like me could even have access to it. So I feel a tremendous amount of responsibility to ensure that their livelihood is protected. So if you go to veteransofwar.org/tree branch, you can donate directly to giving them food and medical supplies that are much, much needed in order to keep their traditions alive.
Wow, we will be dropping a link for anyone listening to this on our Magical page, and our group page will be dropping a link when we post this to make it very easy for you to do that. And yeah, Magical will definitely be making a donation on our part too. That's thank you so much for that. That needs to happen 100%.
We wouldn't be here if not for their those traditions. I mean, we wouldn't even know about it.
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
Well, man, Wyly, this has just been an incredible, incredible time talking to you. Thank you so, so much for your time, your story, your insights. I cannot wait for that book. I know you got a lot going on right now.
Well, you know, you just had Tucker Max on a couple of episodes ago. I'm going to be working with their company. So.
Oh, great!
Oh, cool.
Awesome. Tucker was so cool to have on.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he's an amazing dude. He's grown a lot since the frat tire days.
He's so real. He's so real. He just tells it like it is.
Yeah, he definitely does.
That's really cool. You work with Scribe is the name of the company, right?
Yeah, Scribe.
Cool,
fantastic company.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for giving us your time. We're going to link all those links to everywhere we're going to be publishing this here in a couple weeks. One thing we ask every person that's ever on our podcast before they leave is if you could leave the world with one message, what would that be?
Love yourself.
Yes, I love that.
If you love yourself, it's much easier to love others.
So true. So freaking true.
Can I pop a couple plugs in? Veteransofwar.org/tree branch. I try to make my slugs really easy to remember. And if you're on that veteransofwarwebsite.org, check out the research. The things that I talk about are very easily put in the right context with science. But science can be kind of boring. I like talking about the mystical side of it.
Yeah, me too.
I love it. Thank you so much, Wyly. Again, we're going to link. I'll get all the links from you, and when we publish this, we'll make it very easy for people to find these links too.
Yes.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for the work.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing. Keep it up. Keep fighting the good fight, the truth. As hard as it is, you're helping so many people, making so many ripples. Thank you so much, Wyly.
Yes. Happy healing, everyone.
Happy
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.